are not dogs.
There is only one place where you can hear good things like that thrown off quite casually in the general run of conversation, and that is the bar parlor of the Angler's Rest. Although the talk up to this point had been dealing with Einstein's theory of relativity, we readily adjusted our minds to cope with the new topic. In our little circle, I have known an argument on the final destination of the soul to change inside 40 seconds into one concerning the best method for preserving the juiciness of bacon fat.
Cats are selfish. A man waits on a cat hand and foot for weeks, humoring its lightest whim, and then it goes and leaves him flat because it's found a place down the road where the fish is more frequent.
What I've got against cats is their unreliability. They lack candor and are not square shooters. You get a cat and you call him Thomas or George or whatever the case may be. So far, so good. And then one day, you wake up and you find 6 kittens in the hat box, and you have to reopen the whole matter, approaching it from an entirely different angle.
All right. If you want to know what's the trouble with cats, they've got no tact. That's what's the trouble with them. I remember a friend of mine had a cat. Made quite a pet of that cat, he did. And what occurred? What was the outcome? One night, he came home rather late and was feeling for the keyhole with his corkscrew. Not. His cat selected that precise moment to jump on the back of his neck out of a tree.
Typical.
No tact.
I grant you this, but still, in my opinion, you have not got quite to the root of the matter. The real objection to the great majority of cats is their insufferable air of superiority. Cats, as a class, have never completely got over the snootiness caused by the fact that in ancient Egypt they were worshipped as gods. This makes them too prone to set themselves up as critics and censors of the frail and erring human beings whose lot they share. They stare rebukingly, they view with concern, and on a sensitive man, this often has the worst effects, inducing an inferiority complex of the gravest kind. It is odd that the conversation should have taken this turn, for I was thinking only this afternoon of the rather strange case of my cousin Edward's son, Lancelot.
I knew a cat.
My cousin Edward's son, Lancelot, was, at the time of which I speak, a comely youth of some 25 summers. Orphaned at an early age, he had been brought up in the home of his uncle Theodore, the saintly Dean of Bolsover, and it was a great shock to that good man when Lancelot, on attaining his majority, wrote from London to inform him that
I've taken a studio at Bott Street, Chelsea, and propose to remain in the metropolis to become an artist.
the Dean's opinion of artists was low.
As a prominent member of the Bolsover Watch Committee, it was recently my distasteful duty to be present at a private showing of the super film Palettes of Passion.
And he replied to his nephew's communication with a vibrant letter in which he emphasized
The grievous pain it gives me to think that one of my flesh and blood should deliberately be embarking on a career which must inevitably lead sooner or later to the painting of Russian princesses lying on divans in the semi-nude with their arms around tame jaguars.
He urged Lancelot to
return and become a curate while there is yet time.
But Lancelot was firm. He deplored the rift between himself and a relative whom he had always respected, but he was dashed if he meant to go back to an environment where
my individuality was stifled and my soul confined in chains.
And for 4 years there was silence between uncle and nephew. During these years, Lancelot had made progress in his chosen profession. At the time of which the story opens, his prospects seemed bright. He was painting the portrait of
Brenda, the only daughter of Mr. and Mrs. B.B. Carberry Purbright of 11 Maxton Square, South Kensington.
Which means £30 in my sock on delivery.
He had learned to cook eggs and bacon, he had practically mastered the ukulele, and in addition he was engaged to be married to a fearless young vers libre poetess of the name of
Gladys Bingley, better known as the sweet singer of Garbage Mews, Fulham.
A charming girl who looked like a pen wiper. It seemed to Lancelot. Life was very full and very beautiful. He lived joyously in the present, giving no thought to the past. But how true it is that the past is inextricably mixed up with the present, and that we can never tell when it may not spring some delayed bomb beneath our feet. One afternoon, as he sat making a few small alterations in the portrait of Brenda Carberry-Purbright, his fiancée entered. He had been expecting her to call, for today she was going off for
a 3 weeks holiday to the south of France.
And she had promised to look in on her way to the station. He laid down his brush and gazed at her with yearning affection, thinking for the 1000th time how he
worshipped every spot of ink on her nose.
Standing there in the doorway with her bobbed hair sticking out in every direction like a gollywog's. She made a picture that seemed to speak to his very depths.
Hello, reptile.
What homework?
Oh, well.
I can say just half an hour.
Oh, well, half an hour soon passes. What's that you've got there?
A letter, ass. What did you think it was?
Well, where'd you get it?
I found the postman outside.
Gosh.
What's the matter?
No, it's from my Uncle Theodore.
I didn't know you had an Uncle Theodore.
Well, of course I have. I've had him for years.
What's he writing to you about?
Well, if you'll kindly keep quiet for 2 seconds, if you know how, I'll tell you.
The Deanery, Bolsover, Wills. My dear Lancelot, as you have no doubt already learned from your church times, I have been offered and have accepted the vacant bishopric of Bongo Bongo in West Africa. I sail immediately to take up my new duties, which I trust will be blessed. It is in these circumstances it becomes necessary for me to find a good home for my cat Webster. It is, alas, out of the question that he should accompany me, as the rigors of the climate and the lack of essential comforts might well sap a constitution which has never been robust. I am dispatching him, therefore, to your address, my dear boy, in a straw-lined hamper, in the full confidence that he will prove a kindly and conscientious host. With cordial good wishes, your affectionate uncle, Theodore Bongo Bongo.
Of all the nerve, I wouldn't do it.
Why not?
What do you want with the cat?
It's true that given a free hand, I would prefer not to have my studio turned into a cattery or a cat bin, whatever the case may be. But consider the special circumstances. Relationships between Uncle Theodore and self have been for the last few years a bit strained. In fact, you might say we definitely parted brass rags. It looks to me as if he were coming round. I should describe this letter as more or less what you might call an olive branch. If I lush this cat up satisfactorily, shall I not be in a position later to make a swift touch?
He is rich, this bean?
Oh, extremely rich.
Then consider my objections withdrawn. A stout check from a grateful cat fancier would undoubtedly come in very handy. We might be able to get married this year.
Exactly. A pretty loathsome prospect, of course, but still, as we've arranged to do it, we soon better get it over. What?
Absolutely.
Then it's settled. I accept custody of cat.
It's the only thing to do. Meanwhile, could you lend me a comb? Have you such a thing in your bedroom?
What do you want with a comb?
I got some soup in my hair at lunch. I won't be a minute.
She hurried out, and Lancelot, taking up the letter again, found that he had omitted to read a continuation of it on the back page. It was to the following effect.
P.S. In establishing Webster in your home, I am actuated by another motive than the simple desire to see to it that my faithful friend and companion is adequately provided for. From both a moral and an educative standpoint, I am convinced that Webster's society will prove of inestimable value to you. His advent, indeed, I venture to hope, will be a turning point in your life. Thrown, as you must be, incessantly among loose and immoral bohemians, you will find in this cat an example of upright conduct which cannot but act as an antidote to the poison cup of temptation which is no doubt hourly pressed upon your lips. P.P.S. Cream only midday and fish not more than 3 times a week.
He was reading these words for the second time when the front doorbell rang, and he found a hamper on the steps. A discreet from within revealed its contents, and Lancelot cut the strings.
Boy!
What's up?
The cat's come!
All right, I'll be down in a jiffy.
Oh, what ho, Webster? How's the boy?
The cat did not reply. It was sitting with bent head, performing that wash and brush up which a journey by rail rendered so necessary. Lancelot thought to advance and give Webster a friendly fur rumple on his head, when Webster turned and raised his eyes, looking at Lancelot. And suddenly, with sickening force, there came to Lancelot the realization of the unpardonable liberty he had been about to take. Until this moment, though the postscript to his uncle's letter should have warned him, Lancelot Mulliner had had no suspicion of what manner of cat this was that he had taken into his home. Now, for the first time, he saw him steadily, and he saw him whole. Webster was very large, and very black, and very composed. He conveyed the impression of being a cat of deep reserves, descendant of a long line of ecclesiastical ancestors who had conducted a decorous courtship beneath the shadow of cathedrals and on the back walls of bishops' palaces. He had that exquisite poise which one sees in high dignitaries of the church. His eyes were clear and steady, and seemed to pierce to the very roots of the young man's soul, filling him with a sense of guilt.
Sorry.
There was a pause. Webster continued his steady scrutiny. Lancelot edged towards the door,
Excuse me, just a moment.
and sidling from the room, he ran distractedly upstairs.
I say,
Now what?
well, have you finished with the mirror?
Why?
Well, I thought that I might as well have a shave.
Shave? Why, you shaved only the day before yesterday.
I know, but all the same, I mean to say it seems only respectful. The cat, I mean.
What about him?
Well, he seems to expect it somehow. Nothing actually said, don't you know, but you could tell by his manner. I thought a quick shave and perhaps change into my blue serge suit.
He's probably thirsty. Why don't you give him some milk?
Could one, do you think? I mean, I hardly seem to know him well enough.
He paused.
I say, old girl.
Hello?
Well, I know you won't mind me mentioning it, but you've got a few spots of ink on your nose.
Of course I have. I always have spots of ink on my nose.
Well, don't you think a quick scrub with a bit of pumice stone, I mean to say, you know how important first impressions are.
Lancelot Mulliner, if you think I'm going to skin my nose to the bone just to please a mangy cat... Shh! Here, let me go down and look at him.
As they re-entered the studio, Webster was gazing with an air of quiet distaste at an illustration from La Vie Parisienne, which adorned one of the walls. Lancelot tore it down hastily.
So that's the blighter. Shh! If you want to know what I think, that cat's been living too high, doing himself a dash sight too well. You'd better cut his rations a bit.
In substance, her criticism was not unjustified. Certainly there was about Webster more than a suspicion of embonpoint. He had that air of portly well-being which we associate with those who dwell in cathedral districts. But Lancelot winced uncomfortably. He had so hoped that Gladys would make a good impression. And here she was, starting right off by saying the tactless thing. He longed to explain to Webster that it was only her way, that in the bohemian circles of which she was such an ornament, genial chaff of a personal order was accepted and indeed relished. But it was too late. The mischief had been done. Webster turned in a pointed manner and withdrew silently behind the Chesterfield. Gladys, all unconscious, was making preparations for departure.
Well, Bungo! See you in 3 weeks. I suppose you and that cat'll both be out on the tiles the moment my back's turned.
Oh, please, please, please.
He had caught sight of the tip of a black tail protruding from behind him. It was twitching slightly, and Lancelot could read it like a book. With a sickening sense of dismay, he knew that Webster had formed a snap judgment of his fiancée and condemned her as frivolous and unworthy. It was some 10 days later that,
Bernard Warple, neo-vorticist sculptor.
lunching at the Puce Ptarmigan, ran into
Rodney Scollop, the powerful young surrealist.
and after talking for a while of their art,
What's all this I hear about Lancelot Mulliner? There's a wild story going about that he was seen shaved in the middle of the week. Nothing in it, I suppose.
It's perfectly true.
It sounds incredible.
Shall I tell you something, Wobble?
What?
I know for an absolute fact that Lancelot Mulliner now shaves every morning.
Every morning?
Every single morning. I looked in on him myself the other day, and there he was, neatly dressed in blue serge and shaved to the core. And what is more, I got the distinct impression that he used talcum powder afterwards.
You don't mean that.
I do. And shall I tell you something else? There was a book lying open on the table, and he tried to hide it, but wasn't quick enough. It was one of those etiquette books.
An etiquette book?
Polite Behavior by Constant Lady Bodbank.
He'll be dressing for dinner next.
I have every reason to believe that he does dress for dinner. At any rate, a man closely resembling him was seen furtively buying 3 stiff collars and a black tie at Hope Brothers in the King's Road yesterday.
Scollop, we are friends. We are friends of Mulliner's, you and I. It is evident from what you tell me that subversive influences are at work, and that never has he needed our friendship more. Shall we not go round and see him immediately?
It was what I was about to suggest myself.
20 minutes later, they were in Lancelot's studio, and with a significant glance, Scollop drew his companion's notice to their host's appearance. Lancelot Mulliner was neatly, even foppishly dressed in blue serge with creases down the trouser legs, and his chin, Warple saw with a pang, gleamed smoothly in the afternoon light. At the sight of his friend's cigars, Lancelot exhibited unmistakable concern.
You don't mind throwing those away, I'm sure.
And since when have the best 4-penny cigars in Chelsea not been enough for you?
Well, it isn't me, it's Webster, my cat. I happen to know he objects to tobacco smoke. I had to give up my pipe in deference to his views.
Are you trying to tell me that Lancelot Mulliner allows himself to be dictated to by a blasted cat?
Shh! If you only knew how he disapproves of strong language.
Where is the cat? Is that the animal?
He said, pointing out of the window to where, in the yard, a tough-looking Tom with tatted ears stood mewing in a hard-boiled way out of the corner of its mouth.
Oh, good heavens, no. That is an alley cat which comes round here from time to lunch at the dustbin. Webster is quite different. Webster has a natural dignity and a repose of manner. Webster's a cat who prides himself on always being well turned out and whose high principles and lofty ideals shine from his eyes like beacon fires. Curse him! Curse him!
Warple looked at Scollop. Scollop looked at Warple.
Come on, old man. We are your friends. Confide in us.
Tell us all. What's the matter?
You want to know what the matter is? Listen then. I'm cat-pecked!
Cat-pecked?
Now, you've heard of men being hen-pecked, yes? Well, I'm cat-pecked. It's something in the beast's eyes. Something hypnotic. He casts a spell upon me. He gazes at me and disapproves. Little by little, bit by bit, I am degenerating under his influence from a wholesome, self-respecting artist into, well, I don't know what you would call it. Suffice it to say, I've given up smoking. I've ceased to wear carpet slippers and go about without a collar. But I never dream of sitting down to my frugal evening meal without dressing. And I've sold my ukulele.
Not that.
Yes, he considered it frivolous.
There was a long silence.
Mulliner, this is more serious than I had supposed. We must brood upon your case.
It may be possible to find a way out.
No, there's no way out. I've explored every avenue. The only thing that could possibly free me from this intolerable bondage would be if once, just once, I could catch that cat unbending. If once, merely once, it would lapse in my presence from its austere dignity, but for a single instant I feel that the spell would be broken. But what hope is there of that? You were pointing just now to that alley cat. That animal has spared no efforts and strained every nerve to break down Webster's inhuman self-control. I have heard that animal say things which you would think no cat with red blood in its veins would suffer for an instant. And Webster merely looks at him like a suffragan bishop, eyeing an errant choir boy, and turns his head and falls into a refreshing sleep.
He broke off with a dry sob. Wolfle, always an optimist, attempted in his kindly way to minimize the tragedy.
Ah, well, it's bad, of course, but still, I suppose there is no actual harm in shaving and dressing for dinner and so on. Many great artists. Whistler, for example.
Wait, you haven't heard the worst.
He rose feverishly and, going to the easel, disclosed the portrait of Brenda Carberry Purbright.
Have a look at her, will you, please?
His two friends surveyed the face before them in silence.
What do you think?
Miss Carberry Purbright was a young woman of prim and glacial aspect. One sought in vain for her reasons for wanting to have her portrait painted. It would be a most unpleasant thing to have about any house. Scarlet broke the silence.
A friend of yours?
I can't stand the sight of her.
Then I may speak frankly. I think she's a pill.
A blister.
You've described her to a nicety. She stands for everything most alien to my artist soul. She gives me an actual pain in the neck, and I'm going to marry her.
What? But you're going to marry Gladys Bingley.
Webster thinks not. At their first meeting, he weighed Gladys in the balance and found her wanting. And the moment he saw Brenda Carberry Purbright, he stuck his tail up at right angles, uttered a cordial gargle, and rubbed his head against her leg. Then, turning to me, he looked at me. I could read that glance. I knew what was in his mind. From that moment, he has been doing everything in his power to arrange the match.
But Mulliner, why should this girl want to marry a wretched, scrubby, hard-up footler like you? Have courage, Mulliner. It is simply a question of time before you repel and sicken her.
No, you speak like a true friend, Warple. But you do not understand. Old Ma Carberry Purbright, this exhibit's mother, who chaperones her at the sittings, discovered at an early date my relationship with Uncle Theodore, who, as you know, has got it in gobs. She knows well enough that someday I shall be a rich man. She used to know my Uncle Theodore when he was the vicar at St. Botolph's in Knightsbridge, and from the very first she assumed towards me the repellent chumminess of an old family friend. She has always been trying to lure me to her at-homes, her Sunday luncheons, and little dinners. Once she actually suggested that I escort her and her beastly daughter to the Royal Academy. To all these overtures, I remained firmly unresponsive. My attitude from the start was one of rigid aloofness. I did not actually say in so many words that I would rather be dead in a ditch than at one of her at-homes, but my manner indicated it. And I was just beginning to think I had choked her off when in crashed Webster and upset everything. Do you know how many times I've been to that infernal house in the last week? 5! Webster seemed to wish it. I tell you, I'm a lost man.
He buried his face in his hands. Scollop touched Warple on the arm, and together the two men stole silently out.
Bad.
Very bad.
It seems incredible.
Oh no, cases of this kind are, alas, by no means uncommon among those who, like Mulliner, possess to a marked degree the highly strung, ultra-sensitive artistic temperament. A friend of mine, a rhythmical interior decorator, once rashly consented to put his aunt's parrot up at his studio while she was away visiting friends in the north of England. She was a woman of strong evangelical views, which the bird had imbibed from her. It had a way of putting its head on one side, making a noise like someone drawing a cork from a bottle, and asking my friend if he was saved. To cut a long story short, I happened to call on him a month later, and he had installed a harmonium in his studio and was singing hymns, ancient and modern, in a rich tenor, while the parrot, standing on one leg on its perch, took the bass. A very sad affair. We were all much upset about it.
You appall me, Scollop. Is there nothing we can do?
We might wire Gladys Bingley to come home at once. She might possibly reason with the unhappy man. A woman's gentle influence. Yes, we could do that. Look in at the post office on your way home and send Gladys Bingley a telegram. I'll owe you for my half of it.
In the studio they had left, Lancelot Mulliner was staring dumbly at a black shape which had just entered the room. Lancelot had the appearance of a man with his back to the wall.
No, no, I'm dashed if I do.
Webster continued to look at him.
Why should I?
Webster's gaze did not flicker.
Oh, all right.
He passed from the room with leaden feet and, proceeding upstairs, changed into morning clothes and a top hat. Then, with the gardenia in his buttonhole, he made his way to 11 Maxton Square, where Mrs. Carberry Purbright was giving one of her intimate little teas.
Just a few friends to meet Clara Throckmorton Stooge, authoress of A Strong Man's Kiss.
Gladys Bingley was lunching at her hotel in Antibes when Warple's telegram arrived. It occasioned her the gravest concern. Exactly what it was all about she was unable to gather, for emotion had made Bernard Warple rather incoherent. There were moments reading it when she fancied that
Lancelot had met with a serious accident?
others when the solution seemed to be that
He had sprained his brain to such an extent that rival lunatic asylums were competing eagerly for his custom?
others, again, when Warple appeared to be suggesting that
He had gone into partnership with his cat to start a harem?
But one fact emerged clearly. Her loved one was in serious trouble of some kind, and his best friends were agreed that only her immediate return could save him. Gladys did not hesitate. Within half an hour of the receipt of the telegram, she had packed her trunk, removed a piece of asparagus from her right eyebrow, and was negotiating for accommodation on the first train going north. Arriving in London, her first impulse was to go straight to Lancelot, but a natural feminine curiosity urged her before doing so
To call upon Bernard Warple and have some light thrown on some of the more abstruse passages in his telegram.
Warple, in his capacity of author, may have tended towards obscurity, but when confining himself to the spoken word, he told a plain story well and clearly. 5 minutes of his society enabled Gladys to obtain a firm grasp on the salient facts, and there appeared on her face that grim, tight-lipped expression which is seen only on the faces of fiancés who have come back from a short holiday to discover that their dear one has been straying in their absence from the straight and narrow path.
Brenda Carberry Purbright, eh? I'll give him Brenda Carberry Purbright. My gosh, if one can't go off to Antibes for the merest breather without having one's betrothed getting it up his nose and starting to act like a Mormon elder, it begins to look a pretty tough world for a girl.
I blame the cat. Lancelot, to my mind, is more sinned against than sinning. I consider him to be acting under undue influence or duress.
How like a man, shoving it all off onto an innocent cat.
Lancelot says it has a sort of something in its eye.
Well, when I meet Lancelot, he'll find that I have a sort of something in my eye.
She went out, breathing flame quietly through her nostrils. Warple, saddened, heaved a sigh and resumed his neo-vorticist sculpting. It was some 5 minutes later that Gladys, passing through Maxton Square on her way to Bott Street, suddenly stopped in her tracks. The sight she had seen was enough to make any fiancé do so. Along the pavement leading to number 11, 2 figures were advancing, or 3 if you counted a morose-looking dog of a semi-dachshund nature, which preceded them, attached to a leash. One of the figures was that of Lancelot Mulliner, natty in grey herringbone tweed and a new Homburg hat. It was he who had held the leash. The other Gladys recognized from the portrait which she had seen on Lancelot's easel as
That modern dewberry, that notorious wrecker of homes and breaker up of love nests, Brenda Carberry Purbright.
The next moment, they had mounted the steps of number 11 and had gone in to tea, possibly with a little music. It was perhaps an hour and a half later that Lancelot, having wrenched himself with difficulty from the lair of the Philistines, sped homeward in a swift taxi. As always, after an extended tete-a-tete with Miss Carberry Pirbright, he felt
dazed and bewildered, as if I'd been swimming in a sea of glue and had swallowed a good deal of it.
all he could think of clearly was that he wanted a drink, and that the materials for that drink were in the cupboard behind the Chesterfield in his studio. He paid the cab and charged in with his tongue rattling dryly against his front teeth, and there before him was Gladys Bingley, whom he had supposed far, far away.
You!
Yes, me!
Her long vigil had not helped to restore the girl's equanimity. Since arriving at the studio, she had had leisure to tap her foot 3,142 times on the carpet, and the number of bitter smiles which had flitted across her face was 911. She was about ready for the battle of the century. She rose and faced him, all the woman in her flashing from her eyes.
Well, you Casanova!
You who?
Don't say you who to me! Keep that for your Brenda Carberry Pirbrights. Yes, I know all about it, Lancelot Don Juan Henry VIII Molyneux. I saw you with her just now. I hear that you and she are inseparable. Bernard Warple says you were going to marry her.
Oh, you mustn't believe everything a neo-vorticist sculptor tells you.
I bet you're going back to dinner there tonight.
The shot went home. Lancelot hung his head.
There was some talk of it.
Ah,
I don't want to go, honestly, I don't, but Webster insists.
Webster?
Yes, Webster. If I attempt to evade the appointment, he will sit in front of me and look at me. Well, he will. Ask him for yourself.
Gladys tapped her foot 6 times in rapid succession on the carpet, bringing the total to 3,148. Her manner had changed and was now dangerously calm.
Lancelot Molyneux, you have your choice. Me on the one hand, Brenda Carberry Pirbright on the other. I offer you a home where you'll be able to smoke in bed, spill the ashes on the floor, wear pajamas and carpet slippers all day, and shave only on Sunday mornings. From her, what have you to hope? A house in South Kensington, possibly the Brompton Road. Probably with her mother living with you. A life that will be one long round of stiff collars and tight shoes, of morning coats and top hats.
Lancelot quivered, but she went on remorselessly.
You will be at home alternate Thursdays, and will be expected to hand the cucumber sandwiches. Every day you will air the dog, till you become a confirmed dog airer. You will dine out in Bayswater and go for the summer in Bournemouth or Dinard.
Bournemouth.
Choose well, Lancelot Molyneux. I will leave you to think it over. But one last word. If by 7:30 on the dot you have not presented yourself at 6A Garbage Mews, ready to take me to dinner at the Ham and Beef, I shall know what to think and shall act accordingly.
And brushing the cigarette ashes from her chin, the girl strode haughtily from the room.
Gladys!
But she had gone. For some minutes, Lancelot Molyneux remained where he was, stunned. Then, insistently, there came to him the recollection that he had not had that drink. He rushed to the cupboard and produced the bottle. He uncorked it and was pouring out a lavish stream when a movement on the floor below him attracted his attention. Webster was standing there, looking up at him, and in his eyes was that familiar expression of quiet rebuke. Scarcely what I have been accustomed to at the deanery, he seemed to be saying. Lancelot stood paralyzed. The feeling of being bound hand and foot, of being caught in a snare from which there was no escape, had become more poignant than ever. The bottle fell from his nerveless fingers and rolled across the floor, spilling its contents in an amber river, but he was too heavy in spirit to notice it. With a gesture such as Job might have made upon discovering a new boil, he crossed to the window and stood looking moodily out. Then, turning with a sigh, he looked at Webster again, and looking, stood spellbound. The spectacle which he beheld was of a kind to stun a stronger man than Lancelot Mulliner. At first, he shrank from believing his eyes. Then slowly came the realization that what he saw was no mere figment of a disordered imagination. This unbelievable thing was actually happening. Webster sat crouched upon the floor beside the widening pool of whiskey. But it was not horror and disgust that caused him to crouch. He was crouched because, crouching, he could get nearer to the stuff and obtain crisper action. His tongue was moving in and out like a piston. And then abruptly, for one fleeting instant, he stopped lapping and glanced up at Lancelot. And across his face, there flitted a quick smile. So genial, so intimate, so full of jovial camaraderie, that the young man found himself automatically smiling back. And not only smiling, but winking. And in answer to that wink, Webster winked too. A wholehearted roguish wink that said as plainly as if he had spoken the words, "How long has this been going on?" There was a slight hiccup. He turned back to the task of getting his quick before it soaked into the floor. Into the murky soul of Lancelot Mulliner there poured a sudden flood of sunshine. It was as if a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The intolerable obsession of the last 2 weeks had ceased to oppress him, and he felt
a free man!
At the 11th hour, the reprieve had come. Webster, that seeming pillar of austere virtue, was one of the boys after all. Never again would Lancelot quail beneath his eye. He had the goods on him. Webster, like the stag at eve, had now drunk his fill. He had left the pool of alcohol and was walking round in slow, meditative circles. From time to time, he mewed tentatively, as if he were trying to say, British Constitution. His failure to articulate the syllables appeared to tickle him, for at the end of each attempt he would utter a slow, amused chuckle. It was at about this moment that he suddenly broke into a rhythmic dance, not unlike the old saraband. It was an interesting spectacle, and at any other time Lancelot would have watched it raptly. But now he was busy at his desk, writing a brief note to Mrs. Carberry Pirbright, the burden of which was that
she thought I was coming within a mile of her fouled house tonight or any other night, and she's vastly underestimated the dodging powers of Lancelot Mulliner.
And what of Webster? The demon rum now had him in an iron grip. A lifetime of abstinence had rendered him a ready victim to the fatal fluid. He had now reached the stage when geniality gave way to belligerence. The rather foolish smile had gone from his face, and in its stead there lowered a fighting frown. For a few moments he stood on his hind legs, looking about him for a suitable adversary. Then, losing all vestiges of self-control, he ran 5 times around the room at a high rate of speed, and falling foul of a small footstool, attacked it with utmost ferocity, sparing neither tooth nor claw. But Lancelot did not see him. Lancelot was not there. Lancelot was out in Bott Street hailing a cab. To the driver he said,
6A, Garbage Mews, Fulham!
The end.